I'm live. I'm really excited to go live with Hala Khouri. We're going to talk about her book, Peace from Anxiety, Get Grounded, Build Resilience, and Stay Connected Amidst the Chaos, because we all know there's chaos. No matter what in life, there will be moments of chaos. Good to see you.
So good to see you too, Rachel. I'm so happy to be here with you this morning.
I've actually listened. I'm on my second round of listening to the book. I've turned into my reading is now listening. My reading is listening. So that's why I've been holding up the electronic version, which
I'm holding your book, which is like by my nightstand, and like I know your work and I know you, and honestly, I mean, we're gonna talk about my book, I know, but like this is like really the most radical part of the work is like actually thinking about our pleasure and our joy. So thank you for writing.
Yeah. Well, I really feel like your book is such important foundational groundwork to get to pleasure and just more, the kind of thorny, taboo issues of sexual and erotic health as well. But we both talk about trauma, whether it be collective and sexual trauma or trauma related to different systems or family of origin. So I think that, as I've listened, we have such a similar language. And I feel like I have to give credit to the fact that when I first got involved, I think it was 2010 when I first got involved with Off the Mat Into the World, absolutely changed my life. And that's why I had to include you all in my acknowledgments of the book, because that's really what helped me to go from being a psychologist that was so focused on individual health to looking beyond the individual, beyond myself, to larger systems and the importance of activism and collective care. So, and the first section of my book really is so especially influenced by Off the Mat Into the World. So just, do you mind sharing just for some of my listeners exactly what that organization is and all that you do?
Yeah. Off the Mat is an embodied leadership training institution. We train leaders, like you, like folks come to us. Some of them are already doing amazing work in the world, and we invite them to contextualize their work within the broader systemic socio-political issues at hand. Some people come and they don't know what their purpose is, right? And so really our work is training folks in their leadership, in their community engagement, in both a trauma-informed way and in a centered and grounded in social justice. And so you're that perfect sort of success story, right? Coming in already so grounded and doing such important work, and then taking from these trainings this other piece that just takes your work to another level. And we've been around for 15 years doing this work.
Is it 15? Okay, I was trying to remember. Yeah, love it. And just all of the other people I met through the organization. But yeah, you and Suzanne and Sean. Yeah. So just want to give a big thank you. So what I'd love to just touch upon it with your book is this idea of, I have my little notes here, the gifts of trauma. Because you can imagine that there might be people who are like, what? There's no gifts about this. I love that idea. And also how you had talked about this moving from survival self to authentic self. I love that. Do you mind sharing more about that? How you talk about that?
Yeah, for sure. I think that, there's so many different ways to deal with unmetabolized trauma and undischarged traumatic stress, right? And as we know in our somatic work together, part of it is working with the nervous system. But another big part is thinking about what we might learn, right? Like, I'm not somebody that believes that everything happens for a reason, but I think we can decide to give it meaning after the fact, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes the reason can be a way to try to escape or bypass our grief or our pain. But when we can make meaning of our suffering, that can often help us move out of it. And there's a lot of research around this that shows that. So this seeing the trauma as the gift, as the wound is the gift, as the wound is the gift. Most of us, and I imagine the folks listening now, if you think about the things that you're passionate about, often they're connected to your own pain and your own trauma, your own desire to heal. So we can transform all of that into our healing, basically.
Well, and that you also had talked about, we know about post-traumatic stress. Wasn't there, you were talking about sort of pre-traumatic was it resilience? Or tell me more about
Well, I mean, so Mark Epstein is a Buddhist psychologist, and he talks about pre-traumatic stress, that like, even if we haven't had any difficulty, we can be traumatized or, stressed out by what we think is ahead of us, right? So, often, like, so my definition of resilience, and it's a word I have a love-hate relationship with, because I think that we need to complicate it, but resilience is often defined as being able to bounce back from difficulty. And for a lot of trauma survivors and people that are like trauma affected, there's no bouncing back, right? That trauma changes us. And so I like to think about our resilience as allowing ourselves to be transformed by our difficulty. And transformed in a way that feels life affirming and meaningful. Because sometimes when we resist the pull of that transformation, when we go through something really difficult and we just want to be who we were before that, that can make things worse, versus surrendering to it and saying, all right, who can I be on the other side? How can I include this into who I am so that it allows me to be a more complex, nuanced, depthful human being? And so that's the definition of resilience that I like. And the other piece of resilience is, I think resilience is about having the sense that whatever is coming our way, we can get through it. I know when I'm my most anxious, I'm not ruminating about the past. I'm afraid of the future, right?
Yeah. But that's such an important point too, is that rather than to be in this place of trying to control everything, anticipate, what if we really did have, and to use, somatic experiencing language, we really did have these tools and strategies for regulation and, containment and discharge, so that our window of tolerance is greater. And so if we trusted in ourselves to be able to cope with discomfort and to ride the wave, we wouldn't then live in kind of fear that makes our life smaller and smaller. And so I think of that as such a strength, to have that, carry that with us in our own body.
Absolutely. And I love that, this idea that when our window of tolerance is big, then our life can be big without it being overwhelming, right? When we have a very small window of tolerance, then we have to keep making our lives smaller and smaller because we're so afraid, right? And again, not, and to bring in the systemic part, which I know you do as well, not all of this is about our own individual sort of grit and resilience. For some people, they're targeted in the world. There isn't safety out there, and it's very real. So we need to use these tools to cope with that, sort of as an FU to the system of, I know you want my world to be small, but I'm not going to take that on in my body.
An F you to the system. It's like channel that inner rebel within that says like, nope, I'm not going to listen to that. I'd love to just attend to the question that was posed by Nick Hill Cholera. I don't know if I said that handle correctly, but what asanas should I do to extract the freeze response in my body? And I guess this is with the understanding of how we have the fight, flight, freeze response. And then there's also conversation around this sort of fawn, fake response, which also maybe it would be great to talk to you about. But with regard to this question of the freeze response, do you have any initial thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's particular asanas that help with particular things. Freeze, when people are in freeze, there's just way too much activation in the nervous system. And so we're going to brace because it feels like too much. And so freeze, often you have to release it, has to be done very slowly. And with the support of a skilled or loving presence. It doesn't always have to be a therapist. It can be just a loving presence that helps somebody first find resource. The resource is about finding something that feels safe or supportive or grounding. We're not going to release traumatic energy if we don't ground into something supporting us. So it's about tapping into something supportive and, really slowly allowing that energy to move out of the system.
Yeah. And I think of how, even just looking to our animals and pets for like co-regulation, or that sense of also to have a little bit of containment, as a childless woman who lives alone. And I think of like my animals is also just to help me to sort of get out of a place of just, frozen. So it sometimes doesn't have to be, so much of what I talk about is how from within, but also looking to community and connection to others, and that we don't have to have, like, I know you also talk about in the book, that rugged individualism. And I think I appreciated what you said about your college essay about we come into this world alone, we go out of it alone. And because I do think that I have grown up with a lot of that, just and continue to be this independent person that has to remind myself that it's okay that I might, really want help and want connection and want to share in, my grief right now also with somebody else. And it's also okay if I have times when I don't want to. But.
Absolutely. And we're social beings, and so for many of us it's absolutely necessary, and for folks for the times where you just want to go inside and be alone, when we know we're embedded in a community, it feels like a choice to be alone versus when there isn't an option. That's sort of the difference between loneliness and solitude, right? I think solitude is we're held in community, we're choosing solitude, and that's different.
Yes.
Yeah.
The one other question here I see is just when my mother's legs involuntarily shake when she's asleep. Help. Now I think of that as could just be also neurological, like restless leg syndrome, but maybe we look at it with the lens of trauma.
Yeah.
Discharge.
Yeah. So from the lens of trauma, we could say, and obviously there's that, we can't diagnose over a chat here, but it could be an attempt for the body to discharge energy. Again, there needs to be some support and holding so that it's actually a release versus just like an activation continuing to come up and to come up and to come up.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think I've messaged with this person before about their mother and trying to offer support as well. Yeah.
I noticed too that we both share the appreciation for some of the rhymes of like, or some of the sayings that I think really help people understand what's happening. Like you had said, if it's hysterical, it's historical. And that idea of when something might be, our reaction is maybe more disproportionate to what is happening. Like you said, you burn the toast and cry.
And then you're like, oh.
Yeah. I think that is such a good way to build interoception and to build that sense of like, okay, what's happening here, this cause and effect. Tell me a little bit more about like how people can use that to help them.
Yeah, I think that, and I love the term interoception, which is our capacity to sense what's happening inside of us, right? And so when we can be noticing our sensations and specifically what's happening in our organs, right? Like, is my gut clenching? Is my heart racing? Is my throat really tight? When we can be noticing like, like, why is my throat really tight right now? Like, I'm just speaking to this person that like I really like. Interoception allows us to notice when we're activated, right? When the energy is maybe a little higher than the situation calls for, or the opposite, right? When we're completely disconnected. And the more that we are fluent in the language of our own bodies, of our own sensations, it's like, I like to say our body is like our GPS. It's our guidance system. And it doesn't mean we feel great all the time. It means that we can sort of tell, all right, this is it's kind of like the message I sent you this morning of like, I'm having a lot of intensity. I'm tracking my nervous system. I think I got a 20-minute conversation in me, right? Like part of my self-regulation in the midst of like, I'm in a particularly crisis-filled time. My self-care is, all right, I'm going to be clear about what my capacity is, and I'm going to ask for it, even if it means potentially letting somebody down, right? And so it's like, I've got my interoception so down. I'm like, all right, this is how I'm going to get through today. It's a very precise thing, right?
Yeah.
And I have the privilege to be able to do that. Not everybody can sort of tweak their day to match their nervous system, right?
Yeah. But I think there's one thing to know. So interoception, huge, has totally changed my life. And it's always a practice. But then I think when we go from just that inner knowing and then to be able to kind of speak our body boundaries, our nervous system boundaries, like you did, to go to that next step to then actually verbalize and say, hey, even though I might disappoint the person or they might not like the response, I think like that's that whole next layer too of that self-understanding. And then how do we deal with, in relationship and other, how others are going to respond.
Absolutely. And again, the distinction between when we don't do that, then we wait till it's a crisis. And then when there's a crisis, there's no choice, right? Either you're really sick or whatever, you don't have a choice. And so how do we start setting those boundaries before it becomes a crisis?
A resentment towards other people or some of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it can be resentment, but it can also be like just getting sick. Like I know right now the level of stress in my life, if I'm not doing what I did today, like asking for what I need, being willing to disappoint people, I would get sick. Like
Yeah.
100% would get sick, whether it's like an emotional, like, you know, related crisis or something else, I would get sick. So I'm like, oh, I'm tracking my life, right? And using my own interoception to go, all right, I have capacity for this. I don't have capacity for this. And where do we have some choice around that?
Well, absolutely. And I think about the work that we do and how we're also this energy exchange with others as yoga teachers and somatic therapists. And I almost feel like in graduate school, there should be required courses. I mean, we need to have, even from the beginning of education, all sorts of courses on feelings 101, communication and relationships 101. But when I think about people who are in more healing professions and dealing with energy, there needs to be classes on interoception and self-regulation. Otherwise, how can you be that container?
How do you know? And it's interesting because I actually am teaching at a university right now.
Oh, yeah.
And I am teaching my students interoception. Part of their homework is to develop a practice of interoception and healing and self-regulation. And this is a class on community engagement. These are activists. And so we start every class, body scan, what's going on. So it's like, it's really been fun to be in the academy now, bringing this work and training, you know, young people, they're 17 and 18 years old, on like, how are you managing yourselves? Because also there's like a mental health crisis right now. I mean, it's, you know, we all know this, but even before COVID, you know, young people are overwhelmed. They don't have tools. And it's been really, really amazing getting to bring it to college students.
Yeah. I mean, and I think also as people who have written books, to get that message to kind of the larger audience, when you think of how a book, $15, $20, just not, a lot of people, it's just not even an option to go to a therapist or, you know, an hour, hour and a half yoga class. And so I think, I don't know about you, but that was a big part of my hope, is that this could be a way to sort of spread the messages of coping with trauma and bodyfulness and connecting to self, because we all don't have the time, money, inclination, opportunity to do some of these other things.
That's what I love about like books like ours, right? And actually it's been interesting because there's I've been doing a lot of professional development with school teachers and school counselors, and two of the groups I'm working with are using my book. They're doing book groups, and so these are all people holding space. And it's like, that makes me so happy. I'm like, you know what? I don't know that my book sales are like going to be in the top 10 of the New York Times, but if I have the helpers reading it and using it, then that's such a huge success, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that like your book has to be like phase 2. My book preps them for you. It's like, thinking about pleasure and joy. Like we need the system to settle a little bit, right?
Yeah. Well, I know we should wrap up here, but I do think that, maybe it should be required reading. Read your book, Peace from Anxiety, and then get into The Pleasure Is All Yours, which is funny because a lot of people think that it's just a sex book, even though it's really about the pleasures of a nap, the pleasures of taking a break.
Well, you know, and it's about like taking in the good, right? I mean, and that, you know, I start touching on that in my book, and to have a book that's like sort of deconstructing exactly that pleasure is just erotic. It's noticing a beautiful plant or a beautiful color. So I'm so happy that you wrote your book, and just so excited to dive in. Again, I know your work so intimately already, but you know, thank you for writing your book as well. It just feels really good. I feel like there's a whole crew of us writing these books that like really support each other, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's an amazing community. Thank you, Hala. And people can go just say the name of your website.
My website is my name, halakhouri.com. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Good to see you. Mwah. Bye.
Bye.